Today we are going to speak to Michael Günzburger, who's an artist who lives in Zurich. So he's joining me from his studio in Zurich. And Michael's detailed CV is on his page, but he's a printmaker, he's an illustrator, he's an artist who does many kinds of interesting things. Currently, he's also doing his PhD. So we're going to talk all about what he does, his interest in the multi-species world. Mikhail and I have known each other for some time now. So thank you for joining me, Mikhail.
Thank you, Ravi.
And so we just start off with you telling us what is your interest in in the multi-species, and then we'll talk about your practice.
Right. Well, I really like multitudes. I really like layeredness and what the movements are between those layers. So talking about multi-species, it's in the word itself. It's more than one. My idea, actually, this is my natural habitat somehow where I want to be. I love these ideas of multitudes being many things together at the same time, at the same place, which also probably explains the interest in my in the work of my PhD that I'm currently following, or I'm actually about to finish it, which is on Chimera. And Chimera itself is a Greek mythological animal composed of 3 different parts out of a goat, a snake, and a lion. But it's actually a word that kind of earned or got independent or became independent and is used for many things that cannot really be explained or that are composed of more than one thing. So we're talking about compositions, and this is also one of the other relations that comes where it comes to multi-species. Like, the main question is always like, how do things stick together? This is one of the core research lines in my PhD about how do different things come together, how do they stick together, and how do they fall apart again in this, which is the normal case of things, which is the normal unfolding of things, actually.
So you have followed many animals and species and forms in various ways of your printmaking as illustrator. What you just said about multitude really becomes more than multitude. It becomes about other beings as well, very often. I remember this project you did on, polar bears. And could you tell me something more about it? Could you tell us something more about it?
Oh, yeah. Well, that was from 2011 and to around 2017. I was working on a project that actually started very on a small scale. My background, the backbone of my work has always been drawing. And so I came into the idea of drawing hair, and hair is one of the things when you draw it, you have to become generous, because if you just stick to rules, it looks like unnatural. And this is one of these moments in art making, in craft, in the craft of drawing, where you have to behave somehow not structured, but you have to let go of structures, which is to me one of the biggest interests in the arts. Like, that you cannot repeat yourself while making art. So this whole thing developed, like I started drawing animals, and I thought, like, wow, actually I could just take an animal and dip it into ink and print the hide or the hair of the animal so that actually every hair would be visible, which turned out to be not so easy as I thought it was be, which marks also the beginning of a wonderful collaboration with the printmaker Tommy Wolfensberger here in Zurich, because I approached him with an animal hide under my arms, told him like, can we print this so we can actually see every hair? And he helped a lot with that. And at some point, very early in the project, it became very clear that it's not really interesting to just print every animal, because there's a choice. There are choices that have to be made, like what do you print or what do you do? And I somehow spotted that there's a huge potential in the project if I go as slow as possible, but if I set a goal where this should end. Like it should be a series of work that will end, or I started saying this is a series of work that will end as soon as I have printed a polar bear. Not really knowing what that actually mean in course of technique, in course of network I'd have to do, of whom to talk to. I wouldn't even know which polar bear I would have to print. But knowing that I'm touching something highly symbolic, where a lot of people worked on, and it is something where, at least in Europe, I mean, it's in all the children's books. These polar bears are in all the children's books. These, like, polar bears are also the pin-up for climate change. It's something that is really heavy loaded on many levels. But I did not really see a lot of artistic approaches to it. And most people who worked on polar bears or with polar bears did not have the experience of actually having touched a polar bear, or like
It's a
it's
ferocious,
always,
huge animal.
yeah, that's what we think about it. Or I mean, we think about huge 4 meter animals that, you know, that would just eat you as soon as they see you. But we wouldn't even know where they are exactly. Sometimes we see them in zoos, sometimes, but it's not really a natural thing.
Mhm.
So I came to the point where it was utterly important for me to actually lead a project where it's about the experience of having spent some time, some moment with a polar bear in the same room, or that this polar bear and I actually collide at some point where we really touch. Um, I wasn't sure which polar bear. I wasn't sure what size of polar bear. You know, I didn't know where it's gonna happen. It was really,
It's
I
quite an
took it as
ambition.
slow. Yeah, it was, and it turned out to be quite difficult because zoos were mostly afraid of letting me in. Because it's not good advertising if an artist, you know, works with a polar bear in a zoo, because like it's easy to make a scandal there, and as zoos rely mostly on patronage,
Public
so
funding, yeah,
yeah,
patronage
public
funding.
funding, they don't want anything of that. So I tried to go many ways. Going to Inuit, I had connections to Inuit in the Canadian Arctics. I had connections to Russia at some point. But it made it easier. Actually, the easiest way, or for me, the easiest to find people I could relate to, was actually the Norwegian Polar Bear Research Group. That somehow I got lucky and got introduced to one of the veterinarians who worked on the team, and he introduced me to the whole group. But it was a very personal thing in the end to actually get to the point, because there's probably like 5 people on this planet who could have given me access to a polar bear.
Yeah.
Um, so it was a lot of fun actually doing that. I learned a lot about animals, and there was a massive amount of sadness actually involved when I printed the polar bear, because it was so much fun doing this project. So this is how things go. This is where I started also. It's always like something has to form, it has to come into place. And to me, like the moment I was really close, the moment I touched this polar bear, there was some kind of
You
moment
could
there
touch
where,
a polar bear.
yeah, we had to lift it to print it. So talking about printing animals, we took the animals I'm talking about we was a group of people, like not possible to do that alone. We lifted, or we touched the animal, we lifted it, dipped it into ink, and
It's a
printed.
dead polar bear.
Well, this special polar bear I got was dead. Yeah,
Yeah.
it died of natural causes.
Yeah.
That was the easiest way for me to get it.
Yeah.
Another thing I learned there, that natural cause with a polar bear mostly means starving. So
Oh,
if I tell people about how this animal died, and I say just starving, everybody thinks about climate change.
yeah.
But actually, the only way for a polar bear to die is by starvation. There's this because they have no natural predators that would eat them or hunt them or kill them.
Yeah.
So the only thing they have is a cannibalism among each other, or very rarely one gets shot by humans, but that's super
Mm,
rare actually.
mm,
Um, and it's also, I mean, it was a lot of learning process also in terms of ecology. I mean, I had to admit that I really consume and I put in a lot of energy actually to get to this point to even print a polar bear, because they live their natural habitat is so large and is so hard to survive there for us that we really have to there's so much energy you have to put in.
mhm.
That was really there was really a lot of energy in that actually.
Mm.
Mm.
And then how did you print it? They lifted it, dipped it into ink,
Mm.
and then printed it on paper.
Almost. almost
Wow.
almost no. No, it's a bit but basically what you say is true. We worked not with ink, but we worked with a natural fat. I was testing it on other animals, so I would have been ready to print a polar bear that was a lively polar bear. That would have been possible. So we worked with natural fats, that there was no cleaning would have been necessary, and we printed actually on a transparent plastic film, so that was easier to transport, and we were able to take printing plates from that plastic film. So it
Right.
was more like a contact copy of a photography, basically from what we're doing. Um, but I think the most important thing about it was actually, I mean, this still sticks with me, that we were actually there, that there was this moment of, even though the bear was dead, and obviously it's the moment for the bear, it was not such an important moment, but for me, just to get an understanding of what the size of this animal means, what the smell means, how it feels like if you touch something, it just changes your whole approach to it.
Yeah. And then uh, you did same thing with other animals too.
Yeah, like I said, I print every animal on the way to get to polar bear, and I will stop as soon as I have this polar bear. So it was a very nice series, consisting. It started with the sheep. We did a foxtail just to test the fat. I printed the polar bear research group dog, or actually they printed them under my guidance, so I could explain them what I'm actually going to do to the polar bear. There was some stuff there was a lot of technical development that had to be made, and we had the worst case scenario for what could happen if we have to print a polar bear in the Arctic at night, or in the dark, in snow with winds, somewhere outside with a polar bear that would just sleep for 15 minutes. So there was a lot of there was really a lot of preparation needed
Yeah, yeah.
to be there at this very spot at this very moment to just do it. And
I know of nobody else who'd sort out polar bears to print them. It's
no, I
it,
haven't met anyone. I saw a lot of I saw a lot of animals. I saw a lot of images used,
yeah, photographs and videos and all.
everything. But as I'm saying, there's something else that you talk differently. I mean, it's the same. I mean, I have a long-standing tradition on working with craftspeople. I mean, that's where we met in India in 2008. And if you have a common ground when you to talk about when you're like, if you work with the same tool, either you're making art with it or you're making a table with it, you're working with wood. I mean, you can talk about that tool, but you can talk about this experience of using that tool, but you can also talk about the same experience of having this as having a common friend as a platform, or but also having the experience of having touched a polar bear gives you, it just puts it on another
What
level.
does it feel
A
as
polar
an
bear,
artist? Yeah, when you touch it and something it's always so abstract, these most of us haven't touched most animals except pet animals.
yeah.
And such an abstract idea. We don't even know. I mean, I doubt if we know how it feels.
Well, the first thing you observe is that they stink. I mean, they're predators, they're meat eaters. You know how dog poo smells. Imagine it.
Oh,
Imagine
really?
yeah. So imagine this as a first thing, especially if you approach the bear in for us normal temperatures. That makes a big thing. The hair is not really soft. I mean, we know all these photographies of pinups on polar bear furs in front of a chimney. That's not really a pleasant thing, actually.
Uh-huh.
It's not something you want to spend the night on.
Yeah.
Um, that's it. And then there was, I mean, and actually they're big, but we know other animals that are actually larger. I mean, every cow is larger than a polar bear.
Mhm.
Um, so the experience of this beast, or like the imagination of that this is a beast, is something very artificial.
Mhm.
This is something very cultural. This is something these are attributes that we give to this animal, and we have no idea. We have no idea. And also, I mean, these were also my limits. I was actually really happy to not having met a polar bear that was alive. I mean,
Mm.
I've seen researchers who walk around flocks of polar bears
Oh, really?
without protective tools, and asked about how they do it. They say, well, um, you just have to be what is it, you just have to behave dominant. That was that was
Behave dominant.
the behave dominant. The
Mm.
polar bears will understand.
Uh-huh.
um but yeah,
So,
so there's a lot of things to learn about communication with polar bears.
so this sort of artistic instinct to work with polar bears or other
Mm,
animals, and then doing this PhD called Chimera, which you call
mm,
Chimera, you have a tentative title. You told me you don't have to imagine.
right.
How does this lead from one to the other? What is it instinctively you're trying to do as an artist when you go from that to researching into this mythical figure, Greek figure,
Well,
and why would you do it?
there's some. I mean, I love to go really broad in
Yeah.
terms of research. I'm the happiest when I can make art. I'm
Mm,
not so much into curating, or not so much. I mean, curating my own work is always much more difficult than making it.
mm,
And I'm the happiest when I have these processes where I can just go with see what kind of bridges, what kind of doors to other fields open, and be very open. Be like, see, hey, what's on the way? Like, as with the printing of this polar bear, of this animals, suddenly you stand in front of all the artists, this whole history of printing human bodies.
mhm,
So interesting as an artist today is like, what not to repeat. I don't have to repeat Eve Klein's body prints, or I don't have to repeat the Shroud of Turin with Jesus, that Jesus was in it allegedly. Um, I don't have to repeat this, but the question is more like, what would be contribution to that? Like, what hasn't been made, what can be made new? This is like what drives me.
mm,
And as I was really sad that the Animal Print series was over, I thought like, what's going to be next? Where will that
It's
lead to?
over because you wanted it to be over.
Yeah,
It's a promise you made to yourself.
I just tend to do what I say, which is sometimes a drag and sometimes it's quite fun.
Hmm.
Um, um, and so I thought like, okay, I'm not going to do any just pure animal prints anymore. And I thought like, well, let's see what comes up if I start what comes up when I combine animals and persons and humans on a printing plate. I can show you one or two tries I did on that. I'll share the screen.
Yeah, it's shared.
Here's a test with a fish and a print of my head, and that was just one of the very first very raw tests of what I was trying to do. And as you see, it somehow sticks together. But actually, the reason why it sticks to why it feels, I mean, the difficult thing was actually when you bring two things together. I mean, this is a thing we called in German, we call it Mischwesen, which is Chimera is actually used for all kinds of Mischwesen in this way. So this is a kind of a chimera, not a classical one in the Greek, as in the Greek mythology, but there's actually two things coming together. And the question, here's the question about the glue, like what do you actually have to make to that something sticks together? I'll show you another one.
Yeah.
Now here we are already in a different spot. This is something I published. As you see, it's the back of a friend and an owl that I blended together. And one of the things that actually kept this, it looked like crap when I just made it purely just the person's back and the wing. So I had to find something, because actually what holds this thing together are these stripes, as you see them, these small stripes and the red and yellow background. These images, I found out like they only really hold together when you give them some context. You see that if you go to old bestiaries, I mean, going through bestiaries from the 14th, 15th century Europe, you see a lot of animals that actually don't exist, or animals were depicted that never really existed, but somehow sneaked into these bestiaries.
Yeah.
And what made it really credible always was actually context. There was always, some background, some people standing behind it. I can show you, I prepared something. So that's a funny one. I sent that to you. It's Peter van der Brocht, Dutch etching from a Dutch artist from the 16th century, and it says it's an allegory about how you say, about the Mühsal, the something is hard, something is like about political steering. So this is actually about politics. So this is actually, they say this is the government. This is actually an allegory on the government. And you see it consists of so many different animals, and it's a kind of a unicorn on a leash. But what it makes it actually credible is actually this whole background, this whole landscape in the background, and the group of people that you know that they exist. So there's something you can relate to. And this whole combination, this whole being, how it's situated, this animal, it only becomes real, it only becomes credible once it's situated. So I had to, so this context is actually glues the things together, glues the different animals together.
It's very interesting.
I hope, yeah.
Yeah. And this is so you relate a lot to this when you think of this coming together, because you talk a lot about the glue, the coming together.
Yeah, no, I think it's interesting. I mean, when you talk about multi-species, I mean, there's what's interesting to it about multi-species is that you're not talking about blending things.
Yeah.
You're talking about being next to each other, but not being, I mean, being
Not,
connected, being in a
yeah,
network,
but
but you're
retaining identity.
retaining identity, which is crucial
Mm.
in terms of art making, of not mixing things, or also for the arts. When I think of research in the arts, it's utterly important that we stay in our own field, that we know who we are, that we keep identity,
Mm.
and be aware of what kind of dependencies we have from each other. I mean,
Yeah.
that's also important in terms of, I mean, we're always dependent. When you're in a network, you're dependent from everyone who's around you.
Mm.
And if there's something you can actually influence are the dependencies towards your closest, towards your peers. So you try to have good dependencies.
Yeah.
Which is a very different, to me, or this is like a very important idea of thinking, that we keep our own identities. We don't become someone else, but we are actually working next to each other. That this
Mm-hmm.
is like the idea of the inspiration that can, that the spark can jump
Interesting.
from one to another. That's
Mm-hmm.
much more interesting to me as a concept to live and to work
Mm.
than I would even put it opposite of the idea of freedom. I mean,
Mm.
freedom, as far as I see it, is or as far as I experience the definitions of what freedoms are, it leads to a lot of loneliness,
Mm.
compared or like opposite to acknowledge that we're completely dependent on our
Mm.
surroundings.
Right. That's true. So no matter how individualistic are, we're not separate from everything else.
Mm.
We are dependent. We have many relational dependencies and interrelationships.
Yeah, and that this dependency from the other is super important. I mean,
Mm.
this is something I would really focus on, that also in terms of um, talking of this glue. Like, this is the thing that keeps two separate things together. This is the connection. This is actually, the glue can be used as like a dependency.
Mm.
That And here comes the definition of chimera into play, where like in biology it's used that it's an organism that is formed of more than one distinctive parts.
Mm.
So the parts stay distinctive, but it forms a whole organism.
Mm.
And that an organism means that there's some life in it, that there's something that it has a name. You can name this thing, and you
Yeah.
don't name the different parts. You're not
Yeah.
as yeah.
Yeah.
While opposite that, I mean, there's many blended forms of things, like hybrid in biology is actually exactly not the distinctive parts again. Like, talking in images, like a chimera is a fruit salad, while a hybrid would be a smoothie,
Mm-hmm.
where there's no more distinctive parts
Mm-hmm.
recognizable. You probably taste it, but it's not. It's become homogenic.
Mm-hmm.
And so with fruit salad, we have to talk about sauce.
Mm.
What keeps the things together? Like,
Mm.
what's the dish? Food is super important in terms of that. What
So
keeps these things together?
would you call it coexistence and codependence
Yeah,
rather than merging or losing identity?
I think you have to put it on a term. Yeah, or coexistence. Yeah, no, it just becomes something and then go separate ways again. I
Mm-hmm.
think that's interesting. I mean, reading ah Sarah Ahmed, how
Yeah.
she thinks of in the politics of cultural, or oh, no, I mix it up.
Mm.
Politics of cultural emotion, something like that.
Mm.
The emotion of cultural politics.
Mm.
Um, she talks about human groups becoming a body and also having the qualities of a body, which is exactly also how I understand chimera, which is also how I understand multi-species things. Like, many things can come together and form a body, but
Mm.
also, break apart again. And also being aware that each one of us is much more,
Interesting.
belongs to more than one group always.
Mhm.
We're not just one. This is like, and that's why the notion of multi-species is actually really interesting, because you have to be very tolerant to which groups you belong to,
Mm.
if you want it or not. Some you can choose, some you cannot choose, but you just have to be aware of that multitude.
Mm. Right. Now, this more recent work you've been doing with food
Mm,
and seafood.
mm,
So this sort of flows into what you're saying. Now, this work, to me, it appears that you're the same idea of connection and trying to see what the glue is, using different etching press techniques to translate the same idea, because that kind of work comes from a
mm.
certain kind of uh, uh, idea you've been following, right? Am I right? And
Yes, absolutely. I mean, the at some point, I mean, I came through to printing through this whole animal print series, and I kept somehow, I thought like, there's something in that press that is really that really attracted my whole attention, and also testing these machines out to the limits. And then I started working with the Chimera, PhD. And first I thought, this might be just these two examples I showed you, that I will just, you know, assemble some collage style animal human beings. And I thought, it's not enough. So as I said, a meal or a recipe is a form of a chimera, because like many things are treated, they come together, they form a dish. And the beauty about it to me is actually that it disappears. We incorporated it. Like on a language level, this plays very beautiful in terms of for art making. And the printing press has a is for me in that PhD, it's actually the place, or it's actually the stage where the chimera, where I can let a chimera appear as I so the stage is basically a print block with ink on it, and then there can be discussion among the people present. What kind of food can we arrange on that printing plate? So we define the parts that the chimera is made of,
Mhm.
and then we cover it with a paper, so it becomes invisible, which is one of the key things. Like the chimera, the moment it actually comes together, there's some magic to it. You cannot see it, you cannot touch it. It's also when chimera is used in sayings like chasing chimeras in Greek, that's a Greek saying. Um, it's always about not touching the thing, or as soon as you touch it, it dissolves. Like the thing you've imagined disappears. As with the polar bear, touch of the polar bear. The moment I touch the polar bear, everything changes. Same
Right.
here. The moment you touch the chimera, it disappears. So on the printing press, I have this arrangement. It's covered with paper, and then it goes it goes into the press under the rolls. That's actually the moment where the chimera disappears, where it's all pressed together. The glue is actually the pressure that forms this very super short moment of line of pressure, where it's all pressed together. And with the help of the ink, of the print ink, something happens. Like here on this thing on the back, there were a couple. I think there's a couple of lemons and artichoke. This is purely vegetarian dish. Um, um,
Do you have any other images you can show us on your computer?
I'd rather take this one.
Yeah. Oh, wow.
So I hope you can see something. That's a fish soup, or
Yes.
that's the left. That's the print block of a fish soup. Actually, the
Ah.
print blocks sometimes are the nicest part
Oh, this is the
of the
print
whole thing.
block.
That's the print block.
Ah.
That's not a paper to it.
Yeah.
There's a lot of, yeah, it's fast, and it's fast making. But the nice thing is actually the chimera really appears in a place where it's not visible and not touchable in the moment in the press. And when it comes out again, it's actually gone already. There's no more, the stuff is somehow destroyed under the pressure. But what we have are the traces of the chimera. So the prints are actually not a picture of the chimera itself, but it's documentation of a presence that was there at some point.
Yeah.
So these three things happening on the printing press work on a symbolic level. This works really nicely.
But in this case, they also lose their individual forms.
Under pressure, yes.
Yes.
Yeah, but they behave special, you know.
Yeah.
I mean, salt doesn't behave like a flour. If you put some booze under it, if you put some alcohol in it, this behaves completely different. I mean, it's a
Oh,
chemical
really?
catastrophe. It's really
Uh-huh.
it's a lot of loss of control. I mean, nothing could come out of it, or there could be a beast coming out of it. You never know. So
Yeah.
there's a lot of magic involved there.
So it appears itself to you as well. So it's like the whole thing is an appearance through the act of doing, things appear to you.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, this is about trying to find out. This is about trying to find out, like controlling it, but controlling rather the setting or the laboratory in term. I know laboratory is a bit strange here, but control the experiment, but not controlling the outcome. And I think the art, as artists, sometimes, if I want to be, you can somehow divide sometimes artists who actually force material into form, or you can see artists who really go with the material.
Yeah.
And to master this, both need a lot of knowledge about the material. And
True.
myself, I'm much more into, let's see what happens if I do this.
Yeah.
So multi-species here. I mean, talking not of, I mean, the fish soup, there's a couple of different.
You worked with a chef in Italy, right?
I usually work with chefs because I like to work with people who know what they're doing. And I mean, I can cook a decent meal, but I know there's people who've spent their life on that. So I'm very happy to give them their place. And it's also more interesting for me.
So you translate that food plate into a print. But
Exactly.
also the print is more than ink, it has traces of food as well. That it has some of the food sticks to the print.
Absolutely. Yeah, no, well, it also falls off after a moment. I mean, there's a lot of discussion about, does it, how does the food react with the colors and everything? Like, will it stay, especially if you print red beet? This is super beautiful as long as it's wet. As soon as it's dry, it becomes yellow and brownish. It changes its appearance. There's a lot of discussion. I mean, there's many artists who work with natural pigments that disappear at some point. But that's what I mean. If food making is a form of art, food disappears too.
That's right.
I think I like this. At the moment, I like this idea of, these things, these, initiating processes. Something appears, something is here, and the whole set of materials and tools you use are your helpers and are also your platforms to communicate with other persons, other groups, other people, through this material or through the platform, and will unlock or will open doors to produce new work, to learn something about these materials. That there's always something coming back if you ask.
Yeah. And then what's the next experiment with this idea of gluing together?
I don't know. Let me see. Well, right now I glue together the different parts of the PhD, which has become kind of a collection of different approaches to this idea of context, to this idea of how different things, how these organisms form. So there's like 10 different approaches in terms of artistic production.
Yeah.
And so I have to bring this together to one document that is readable,
Yeah.
for the institution.
Mm.
That's one thing, and I'm working on a collaboration with a professor from the University of the Arts here in Zurich, where we made kites. He's a specialist in sound kites, and we made kites from goat skins.
Oh.
And actually, we have now we're producing a flock of flying goat skin kites.
Mm.
And there's a whole other story related to it, because these skins are turned into parchment through a specific method, or super simple method of just stretching and drying the skins of the animals. Super important also to find the right person who actually raises these animals. I mean, I'm not just gonna go, you can always buy cheap or badly treated animals. So that's an important part for me, to see where do they come from, how do they live, and what's the reason, why were they killed, etc. There's a lot to go into there in terms of ethics, in terms of which is also, I mean, which was also a big topic in the animal print series. I mean, where or how, what do I allow myself to take? Because I have this, and it's also, when you think about art making, I think it's an important question in terms of how much art has to be made still. Like, is this really, what purpose does it serve?
And how do you answer it for yourself?
Well, if I see an urgency, well, at some point, I just want to see something. I just want to see how this works, and you come to a point where you have to delegate certain decisions. Like when you want to eat meat, you have to delegate it to a butcher, or to a slaughter and a butcher to prepare your piece of meat. I was just trying to get these. You have to take a decision, and just make sure you get to be fully aware of what you're taking. I think, and how much risk you, or how much you inflict on others. Because you cannot, because if you follow this all to an enemies, if you just eat fruit that fall from a tree, you'd probably starve, where the whole humanity will starve. So there's a couple of thoughts that I also still have to rethink. But at some moment there's a decision where you say, okay, I allow myself to take this for me, and that's just okay. It's just like as taking an airplane to fly to the Arctic to take a print of the polar bear, or to visit family across the ocean. These are all decisions we're taking on a daily basis. So there's a form of learning about the planet around, of our existence, of our network, of our situation, of our context.
So it was fascinating speaking with you, Mikhail, and we still have a proposed project to do together.
I know. Holidays first.
Yes. And it's really, really fascinating to hear your instinctive artistic approaches to the tactile and the visceral and the exploration of how things change when you touch them and feel them and see them change and processed in artistic process. So it's a really unusual conversation I've had in this series. So thank you very much for it.
Thank you, Ravi.
I wish you a good evening, and we meet soon.